You're tuned into the All My Friends podcast. If you're new to the podcast, welcome. And if you're a repeat listener, thanks for tuning in again. I'm your host, Liam Oliver, and in this episode, I'll be speaking with Long Story Short founder, Simone Kirkup. Storytelling is a tradition as old as time. It's part of what makes us human. We've always shared stories, whether they're on the big screen or with our friends down at the pub. They're a fundamental way in which we communicate, and they can be used to start movements, build communities, and fight oppression. We should never underestimate the spoken word or the power it has to move people. And that's exactly what we'll be chatting about today with Simone. She'll be sharing why she started Long Story Short, what its mission is, and I'll be asking her why she thinks stories still hold such power over us as individuals and a society. Hopefully, I can coax a few fun stories out of her too. And very quickly, before I go any further, if you're new to the podcast, please like and subscribe, whether you're on YouTube or SoundCloud. Every thumbs up helps. So, Simone, hello. Welcome to the podcast. How are you today?
Hi, Liam. Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I'm grand, really well.
This is the first podcast I've done in a while, so I'm really excited to chat with you today. And just like, it's just nice. We're recording on a Monday evening. It's about 8:05, and it is a nice way after like a long Monday just to have something to look forward to at the end of the day. It's always good just to have chat to people about the interesting things they're doing. So I'm super excited to chat with you.
Oh, absolutely agree. As the resident natterbox, I love a conversation. So I'm always open to have a good chinwag.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, it's probably one of the reasons you started a story club, isn't it?
Absolutely is. Yeah, absolutely is.
So yeah, it is really lovely to have you on the podcast, and I am very excited to speak with you today. I thought a good place to start the discussion would be by you telling us about, Long Story Short. What is it? What's the mission? How's it growing? Everything. Where did that idea come from? And what sort of hurdles and interesting things have happened to get it to where it is today?
Yeah, sure. Well, it started in the midst of the pandemic when we was all sat, in our own homes with only. For me personally, I was actually in isolation with my partner Johnny, and Johnny's a very different personality to me. And there's only so much you can get from one man without seeking conversation elsewhere. And I found naturally over the years, I'm that type of individual within my own social circles that end up in situations that my friends don't. And they always say, you've got amazing stories. And I felt that I can't be the only one. There must be social circles where an individual amongst your own friends and family that also tell great stories about how their life kind of unravels. And I thought, particularly in the world that we were in 2020 and 2021, we're all pretty much online, but how many of us felt isolated and alone? But yeah, if we brought, people together through true stories that they could relate to, then maybe we can make everyone a little bit more connected. So it was really essentially about connecting the disconnected and bringing those stories to life, because I think we live in a society which is constantly on, and you're constantly stimulated by a reel or a video or YouTube or Instagram or Facebook or whatever that may be. And yeah, I think the most things that really resonate, and you only have to look at Netflix for that, are true stories. The Tinless Windsor, the true crime series, all the best brands are the ones that you can really resonate with, the ethos of what they're trying to do. So we started online, and we attracted such a crowd. There was over 200 streams from various different people up and down the UK. We had a guy that was out in the North Sea on an oil rig, and as far flung as France. And I thought, after that first open mic session where I invited a bunch of strangers to talk about the theme that I'd selected, which was coming out, there was 5 individuals that hadn't, had known about Long Story Short, but yet had given a perspective on the theme of coming out. And it was such apparent afterwards how varying they were, despite having a core undercurrent of a theme. And after I did that, there was such a buzz, and I thought, I was going to do this as a podcast, but my feeling on the matter was I really wanted to do it with an audience that I could get that immediate reaction with. And a friend of mine was going through some difficult things in her life, and she said, you know, you should really start to talk about the topics that impact us all, but actually nobody talks about. So things like addiction, or things like love and loss and grief, and you know, they're all fundamental to the growth of humanity. And yet I felt there was kind of almost an opportunity to kind of pass the mic and say, this is normal, let's, you know, normalize the conversation. So it was that in mind that really, you know, set me off on this path of bringing these events to Manchester and doing pop-ups all around Manchester, just to really, for the fundamental reason is I might go into a pub which is very different to you, Liam, which is very different to the guy, you know, that stood next to you. And with that, you'll meet varying, you know, personalities along the way who have a different perspective on life. And I thought that was brilliant, because if you go to the same pub and you do the same night, you'll get the same audience. So I thought, with that in mind, I'll do pop-ups, and hopefully with that I'll bring an audience from all over Manchester. And thankfully that's worked, and it's grown and grown. And I did a show last Thursday, and quite interesting was a girl that performed with me, who performed back in Levenshulme in July, and in the room there was 20 people, and in the room last Thursday there was over 95. And she'd seen the scale of social media, but to have it, you know, and to have her feedback and say how far we've grown in such a short, you know, amount of time since last June was, yeah, really, really special. So I think what I kind of set out for it to be has happened, but it's also grown into such a beautiful community of all walks of life. And yeah, it just keeps getting better.
Amazing. I'm quite interested about what you said there, where you know, it came together during lockdown, so it was, you know, people were connected but felt isolated. I don't really want to go on too big of a tangent here about, you know, maybe like the ills of social media, but how do you sort of reconcile the fact that you know, you came together in a medium which is, you know, quite isolating? Must be quite an interesting sort of dichotomy to sort of weigh up. Like, we're all connected but we're isolated, so I'm going to connect us together with this platform that's quite isolating. Bit of a tongue twister. How do you feel about that? Like,
yeah, I mean, I think social media is amazing in so many senses, but I also think it's not real life. And what I really wanted to do was use that platform to its advantage, but demonstrate that these people live in your community. So, you know, use it as a means to connect. And I think as an adult, it's very difficult to form friendships. And, you know, if we can set up an environment where you can hear your local tongue almost, and your people in your tribe, then, you know, you're going to be attracted to that. So it's not to say that social media didn't help at all. It absolutely did. But I think what the best experience that I've ever had is those that are spontaneous and real, and that you can relate to.
Amazing. Yeah, difficult to form friendships as an adult. I think that's, you know, I started a blog called All My Friends, and there is a reason for that. It was very good for me to meet new people around town, but like, you know, I went through great effort to do that. So it's definitely not easy, is it? Like, when life starts taking over, and like, you know, it's, you know, I think your circle of friends does get smaller as you get older, but like, you know, it can be difficult, you know, to go out and meet new people. That brings me on quite nicely to the next question, which is like, who is Long Story Short for? Like, how can people get involved, and how do you manage the community? You know, how do people go from hearing about you on social media to coming to an event to eventually speaking if they want? What does that look like?
Yeah, sure. So it's quite ironic that I'm actually awful on social media, and I've been very lucky that the large majority of the following that we've gained is through word of mouth. I'll give you an example whereby somebody had come to our show back in June of last year, and my neighbour I'd been telling about, because again we was kind of in this midst of, you know, speaking with your neighbours on a regular basis and hanging out with them, and I was saying I'm doing this show, and he couldn't make that first event but knew it was, you know, taking place. And, you know, the first event couldn't have gone any better than it did, and it was such a success. and he was on the train going to work at Manchester Airport, and he was minding his own business, and there was two girls that were catching up on this train journey, and one said to the other, "What did you do this week?" And she said, "I went to this thing, and I can't quite describe what event it is, but it's about storytelling and connection, and it was absolutely brilliant, and let me try and describe it to you." And then my neighbour obviously recognised when she said it was long story short. And then it was kind of that full circle of, you know, somebody was getting back out into the real world and have found an event which ultimately she found her people at. And I just thought that's a really organic way to kind of, you know, have this conversation. And long story short, it's just a saying that we all do, right? We all want to tell, you know, the short version of the long tale, but often we go all around the point and don't hit it. And how do people get involved? Through contacting me, mostly on Instagram. I have an inbox which is often you know, put forward by somebody who's been to the event previously, or a storyteller that knows another storyteller who said they would be perfect for that particular theme. And that's probably one of the biggest drivers. But I would say word of mouth equally too. 30% of my tickets are single sales, and I think that says a lot about how comfortable individuals are within that space. And a lot of the projects that I've been involved with have been involved because somebody knows somebody. And I think if we can take a lot of the conversation offline, even if you're not brave enough to stand up and tell a story, but maybe you're relating to that individual topic and being able to take that away and then have that conversation in private, then organically it sets up a domino effect ultimately. So yeah, I don't think I've marketed it very well, just because it's not my forte and expertise, and I've been very fortunate that the open mic scene and the creative scene here in Manchester is incredibly diverse, incredibly talented, and it's got this pool of welcoming, you know, all sorts of individuals from all varying backgrounds, all ages. And I think that's the beauty of the open mic space and the community that's been built in Manchester today.
Yeah, but that's really amazing. It's so nice to hear something grow so organically. And, you know, you talk then about connections and it's a small world. Just before the podcast, we spoke about our mutual friend, Sean, who people who know AMF well will know Sean. He's done quite a few bits with us. And then he ended up turning up to a long story short. And I was going to tell Sean about that. And I was going to tell him about this podcast. And then you met him. And then you told him you were going on the podcast. And yeah, it's just a great, lovely, organic way for, you know, people with like-minded interests, or people who want to connect, to come together. And I think that's wonderful. I think it's really, really amazing. Before we go any further, I'd like to do a quick fire I always like to do a few quick fire questions. I just think it's nice to sort of mix up the question format a bit and send some quicker things your way. I was hoping you might be able to share with us like 3 of your favorite short stories and why they're so special to you. This can be a mix of, you know, stories from the events and then also maybe some books you've read. Just 3 sort of things that have really resonated with you, you know, from the events you're doing, but also any sort of like literature really.
Yeah, sure. I'll start with a book that I read over lockdown, and it kind of changed my perspective. And it was a short story called Who Ate My Cheese? And essentially it's 4 mice that go daily in search of cheese. And it's a story whereby one of the mice decide that the cheese is fundamentally not being replaced. Yet we go through a natural day of habit. And every time we expect the result to change despite us going through the same process. And one day the mouse decides to go in a different direction within the maze, and many times he was unsuccessful and came home empty-handed, until one day he found some new cheese. And ultimately, I guess the metaphor for the cheese is that we're constantly growing as individuals, and yet we're body of habit, and I think because we were in the pandemic and it was really difficult to accept that our lives was almost frozen in time, but as soon as you adapt to change and kind of accept that, those ones will be the best ones to kind of, you know, be as content and happy. And it's not to say that every day you win, but don't be afraid of change and going in a different direction. Stay hungry and be bold. And I think that was just a really great metaphor for the time in our lives, you know, in the pandemic. I think the second one was a sports story, and it was actually a YouTube channel that I fell across accidentally, by hosted and led by a guy called Ross Edgeley. And for those that don't know Ross Edgeley, he's one of these guys that does crazy marathons and almost ultra training of all sorts of different kind of adventures, essentially. And he is the first man in history to swim the English Channel all around Great Britain without coming back on board. And really, I wasn't interested in from a, you know, a fitness or nutrition standpoint, but it was really the story behind it and how he was told that he didn't really have the right physique. He was short and stocky and didn't really have a swimmer's body to do that. But yet he had a very strong mind and he had a desire to do this and this sense of adventure. And it was really the art of resilience in that kind of period of going out and seeking it. But he just had a really charming way of kind of connecting his story to humanity and really showing at a varying scale that his YouTube series was brilliant. And then he released a book about it. And yeah, I love that he was an Englishman. I love that kind of sense of adventure. And I love that he was able to kind of overcome his fears and really just kind of dig in when it really was, you know, the best thing, not only for his mind, but for his body too. And then I guess I really struggled with my favorite story because we've had some incredible stories, but I'm going to be cheeky and tell you two. So one of my favorite stories was actually one that we did in the virtual setting. And this is when I knew that I was onto something. So the theme was coming out, and often with that theme, particularly here in Manchester, you know, we have a very large gay scene and we had a lot of coming out stories, which were brilliant because, you know, we have quite a gay following and community now, and I think that was almost relatable even back in the first episode. But one of the guys who came on, he told a story about how he'd actually 12 months earlier had lost his job, and with that he started to spiral and spiral quite rapidly into drinking quite excessively. And he told this story of being quite an energetic, outgoing individual that used to stand at the bar, tell stories to strangers. And then when the bars closed, he ultimately was left in his apartment and had very little of friendship and relationships within his own social circle, and started to drink quite excessively on his own. Why that related to coming out was he actually tried to commit suicide, and he told the audience that he had gone to the bridge and knew that he was going to take the 7:22 train, and he timed it that he was in this kind of state of mind that was the only option for him. But he also had the sense that he needed to take a pee before actually jumping for the train, because he didn't want anyone to find him with wet pants. So he went to take a pee and he actually passed out, woke up in hospital hours later after a dog water found him, and then told this story about coming out the other side and how 12 months on he's now sat on a platform with a stream to 200 of various different strangers scattered around the UK, of how he was on the brink of, you know, he's taking his own life and how he's changed it around. And it was only in that moment was he able to kind of recognize how precious life was, and that once, you know, you actually feel that you're at the end of life, there's so much more to give. And how that, you know, I thought if he can take that theme of coming out, there's probably somebody, especially in that time of the pandemic, that he was also feeling alone, maybe secretly drinking. And hopefully by telling that story, he helped somebody. And I just love that, because I would never have thought from my perspective that would be a coming out story would have got from that particular theme. And the second one is much shorter, but it was essentially on one of our first shows, and two girls turned up, and we do a section within the show that says pass the mic. So it's ultimately done at the very end of the show to ask if anybody has been inspired or actually thought about a story that then relates to the theme, but I haven't actually put the name in the hat pre-show. And this girl steps up called Rab, and she explained that she was actually on a city break to Manchester with her girlfriend in the audience, and they decided to come to an event like this just because it was cheap. And she told the story of actually being the theme was risk and reward, and she said, as an Asian woman, being a lesbian is condemned in my society, and I have to come up to Manchester and be in a city where I feel welcome, and this is why we're in Manchester today. But you know, love is worth the risk, and my girlfriend is the best reward I've ever given, you know, I've ever had. And I thought that was beautiful. I thought it was a really great metaphor for the people of Manchester, that, you know, someone has to come up north in order to feel welcome and accepted. But I also thought it was incredibly brave. And we had so much reaction from that particular pass the mic section that it's something I try and do on most of our shows if we have time.
It really does sound amazing. It's just, yeah, it must be quite emotional at times. It must be quite like a cathartic, it almost sounds like a therapy session these sometimes.
Yeah.
Was that, I don't feel like that was your goal from the beginning, but it seems to have started to occupy this really sort of like lovely space where a community comes together. It's also, I really enjoy hearing about like how people take these topics, which you think like coming out, you'd think would be quite cut and dry in terms of the type of stories people are telling, that and the risk and reward example you gave there. Do you often get people really sort of playing with these themes and twisting maybe the wrong word, but like, obviously putting their own spin on them? Do you get that a lot, and is it really good to see when that happens?
Yeah, all the time. And yeah, it's funny you say about it being a therapy session, because one of the first reviews I ever had was quite comical. It was, this is kind of partly Britain's Got Talent / an AA session, and and it's the most it's the best compliment I can have about Long Story Short, because it's such a roller coaster. And I think that goes down to the creative freedom I give the storytellers to own the stage and their 5 minutes on the mic, because this is their narrative, this is their story, and ultimately, you know, we're just the audience, you know, willing to participate in the true life and the way that it kind of unravels. And yeah, we absolutely do. And we have everything from musicians to drag queens to poets to rappers to spoken word and to the everyday guy that's, you know, sat in the crowd. The youngest has been 18, the oldest 74. And I think that's the beauty of Long Story Short, is never two shows are the same.
I noticed then you mentioned musicians and rappers as well. Now, this is actually quite a curveball considering where we're at in the conversation, but I always need to get in one question about music, because, you know, we chat about everything and all my friends, but we are mainly I'd say in air quotes a music blog. So it'd just be great to get what have you been listening to recently? Have you been to any gigs now that, you know, things are opening back up? You know, where do you like to go? Have you got any music recommendations? You know, have you been out clubbing, or have you been to the Apollo or wherever? You know, what sort of stuff have you been like consuming musically over the past few months, and any recommendations for us?
Yeah, sure. I think, Manchester's, bread and butter is music essentially. And for me, I love music in all different forms. My partner Johnny, who does Long Story Short with us in the background, his musical taste is very different to mine, and we meet somewhere in the middle. But one of the things that we love to do is actually go to open mic nights dedicated to local talent here in Manchester. And they do a Farrow and Friends at the Hatch on Oxford Road, which is amazing. There's a Sunday Sessions in Salford, which is brilliant. And I need to get to more often than I have. In respect of like more mainstream, I love a festival. For me, like, there's something about being outdoors with music, and if I can go to one every weekend in the summer, I'm there. We went to Lost Village last summer, and we saw and one of the standout acts for me was Jada G. And she did a set, and it was just insane. It was surrounded by this forest, and there was umbrellas laid down, and the lighting was just on key, and her set was just insane. We're going to Tasha Sultana in April, which I'm really excited about. A friend of mine over in Sydney is a friend of mine over in Sydney is got a finger on the pulse, and she said that she's doing a tour, check out her album, and I've just been obsessed. And she's at the Apollo in April. I'm really excited for that. But then on the flip side, we're going to a rock orchestra by string quartet at the Halle in Ancoats, which I've never been to, but as a venue, I'm quite excited to explore. So I think for us, it's kind of the essence of storytelling, isn't it? It's in the most natural form. Lyrics really resonate with you, and one album can take you back instantly to a time in your life of pure happiness or sadness. And that's probably one of the reasons I introduce musicians to the stage, because the way that they interpret a theme is always very different to a normal everyday storyteller.
It's amazing what you said about the Halle. I live around the corner from it, and it's one of them places I've walked past, and me and my girlfriend keep saying we need to go in, and we need to go to watch a concert there. Maybe like I get a feeling that it'd probably be a good place to do a Long Story Short as well. I don't know how big it is inside. Maybe it's too big.
I'm not sure.
But it's always good to check it out. And
absolutely it is, yeah.
Lost Village was the last festival I went to in 2019. I've yet to go back to any. Just because of the pandemic, but you don't need to convince me of how good it is, because it is brilliant. Like, I had such a good time there, just like, floating around the woods. And Jada G's amazing as well. I absolutely love her.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, anyone's listening and they need a festival to go to this summer, go to Lost Village.
Lost Village. I just love that you've got no signal. That really makes you make friends. I think of course it depends on the individual, but you put a drunk individual in a forest with no signal, they've got to connect with another human. And the best way to do that is obviously put on their favorite musician, and then you've got an instant best friend, haven't you? And Lost Village just does that perfectly.
It's also got quite a lot of nice we went to some talks as well. It's a proper, like, it's not just a music festival. We did some talks. Well, we tried to get we got really hungover to Shoom on a Saturday, which was nice. And I did want to go do the fine dining bit as well, but
I did that.
Oh, did you? Was it good? Well, it was like hot
it was
there and
insane.
stuff, and
you know what, I just thought, when was this is probably going to go down as going to a Michelin star restaurant with hairy pits, hair on the top of your head, but you've got glitter all over and you're having the best time. You can't do that. You can't rock up to a Michelin star restaurant in London and do that. And to do it in that setting is incredible. What they've created in such a short period of time is commendable.
Yeah, I'm definitely going back as soon as I can, and I will do the food this time as well. Let's move on now and talk a bit more about like the power of stories. We'll sort of get into the main bit of the podcast, as it were. So I'm going to start with a really big question. I'm just going to throw it straight at you. But what makes a good story?
Oh, good one. Authenticity. I think, just being yourself. I think when you're trying to be somebody else, it really doesn't land very well. Having an anchor. I think one of the beauties of storytelling is that if you can catapult an audience into visualizing exactly what's going on, I think is really, really powerful. So having that kind of imagination and enthusiasm for the story really sets the tone of how the audience will react. And I think the third thing for me is, whether it's funny or sad, own it. Like, just really kind of, I always say, don't practice the story beforehand too much, but know the story well enough that you feel comfortable regaling it, in a manner which you cut straight to the point. And so one of the reasons we do long story short is kind of the premise of it is that you tell it in 5 minutes. And people go, oh, I don't think it's long enough. But you really feel it if it's like 8 or 9. You're like, no, come on, get to the point. So just really perfect it. No, really understand, like, the beginning, the middle, and the end, and what that goal is. But be descriptive, be yourself, and add personality to it, because those ones are the ones that land, and those ones are the ones that get the best reaction.
Mm-hmm. Amazing what you said about don't practice it too much as well. So do people tend to ad-lib quite a lot at the sessions, or is it, do a lot of people turn up very like, I'd say notes and paper, but now I imagine it's an iPhone now, isn't it? But do you try and discourage that and let people go, flow a bit more? Like how does that work?
No, I don't micromanage it, because I think there's a certain bravery to stepping up and doing public speaking. So if they need an iPhone or they need a pen and paper and they're reading from their diary, then I say, I welcome it, come forward. But just don't stand there like this, because you're not here at the at the front of the church, ultimately reading a reading. I think it goes down to body language, doesn't it? And it goes down to eye contact, and it's knowing the story well enough that you feel comfortable, but equally having the confidence to know that the actual audience doesn't know what the story is. So they're not going to judge you on something that they actually don't know how it's going to end. So if you what's the word? Improv, like if you just kind of, it reminds me of there's a saying that my boyfriend tells me all the time, and he's like, don't let the truth get in the way of a good story. And he says this in the manner that says, it's based on true stories, but if you exaggerate the truth a little bit just to make it more of a performance, yeah, of course we welcome that, because ultimately it's entertainment that we're doing as a show. So yeah, just add a bit of flair, add a bit of personality. And there was a girl that actually stood up on Thursday, and to look at her, she's an incredibly confident woman, but she was shaking like a leaf. And she stood up and she kind of shaped herself, and she was like, I'm a bad bitch, I'm a bad bitch, I'm a bad bitch. But the audience got on side with her, because it's kind of that setting where she was real. And I think if you're trying to hide that, people see right through it anyway. So I think most people recognize that standing up in front of an audience of 50 plus people is daunting, and sharing something that is often personal adds an element, of extra fright, that it's so easy to sit in an audience and say, actually, I could do that, but most people can't. So I always champion the brave. I always champion the people that are saying, you know what, I've got a story to share, and this is who I am, and this is my story. And I think when you do that, I think when you're kind of comfortable in who you are as a storyteller, and you've got you've got no preconceptions, then yeah, you go in wholeheartedly and you go full on.
Yeah, so you've really sort of highlighted there, like the power of stories and, like, why they're so powerful. And I just wanted to know, like, why do you think as a society, we still like put so much value into them, and like what makes us as people, want to sit down and listen to a good story? Why is it such, they're still just, they grip us so much and bring us together? From your opinion, why do you think that is?
I think as a human race, we're always wanting to find our tribe. If you take yourself, I wonder whether you can think about yourself as an 11-year-old boy going to primary school and leaving that, but yet going to a secondary school that not all your friends continue on to. And, then you move to a city for university, and again, you're starting over. But often you find a subculture within a culture that you're really just trying to find your people. You're really trying to find those brands that really resonate with you, from either from an ethics or a moral, or you actually just get them as individuals. We meet hundreds, if not thousands of people in our lifetime, and yet we can probably, count on our 5 fingers how many of them were instant spark. And yet we're often, craving that feeling of emotion, which is often temporary. But when you find that, and someone describes a story that might not have actually mirror for mirror happened to you, but you understand that feeling of emotion that they're describing, you're like, oh my God, that could have happened to me. That really resonates. Or, I can really understand why they feel that way. And I think as humans, we're all looking for our people, and I think that's why we crave it so much, is that we're a pride of people that really want to be part of something, and we all don't really know what that something is. But we don't wish to be isolated. We wish to be surrounded by people that fundamentally understand you as a human.
Amazing. That leads me on really well to my next question, which is, do you think storytelling can overcome any boundaries? Do you have any examples from Long Story Short you can share with us where, stories have helped bridge divides or grow communities and friendships? And I think from our conversation, we can already see the community that is growing, but, friendships, or have people come together maybe from like the different sides of the political spectrum at Long Story Short, and, realize that, we've got more in common? Any interesting sort of things like that you can share?
Yeah, so I think the platform of Long Story Short is really about one core theme, and showing that regardless of our differences, we were also very similar. And I think only on the themes which are probably a little bit more heavy hitting that we did, which was love and loss, addiction, even our recent one in February, which was sex, self-love and dating, all of them have this core fundamental where, particularly with the addiction, we included a local charity, Turning Point, and that charity has been in our city for probably about 20-30 years, and you would say they're very local working class individuals, and they probably wouldn't hang out in the Northern Quarter, but yet we had a room full of individuals that spoke about addiction, not from an alcoholic or drug perspective, but also from a social media right through to plastic surgery, and even questioning whether addiction is a choice. And the amount of people that were sat in that audience that then went on to volunteer at that particular charity, but yet their paths would never have crossed if it wasn't for that particular night, I thought was brilliant. Because you've got a lot of people that they call Manchester their home, but yet they've got no real connection to this city. And I think if we can break down subcultures, and we can actually, cross paths and hopefully learn, from one another, and give what everybody's got in a lot of respects, and to some degree that's time. We've all got varying degrees of time, and if we can offer someone, just 10 minutes of our time to have a conversation, and just sit with somebody else and enjoy something, I think it's brilliant. I think I said earlier on is that 30% of my tickets are actual single sales. And I had a DM in my inbox on Friday from the show last Thursday to say I came on my own last week, and I just wanted to say that I connected with this girl that was also on her own, and I'm really thankful because I felt comfortable sitting within your space, but actually knowing that somebody else is in a similar, and we've now connected offline on Instagram, and hopefully that will develop. We also had people that went dating from our shows. So we had we did a speed dating session because I felt that, again, connecting with friendships or relationships as adults is very difficult because there's so much choice, and there's very little thought, and there's so much competition that actually if you sit down and have a conversation with someone immediately, whether there's an instant spark. And I was absolutely delighted when we had 6 people, 3 couples that went on second dates. Sadly, none of them worked out, but we had other stories that came out of that, and I thought that was brilliant. That's something I never really looked for when I first started this, but there's been varying degrees of ripples across our communities. And from a political standpoint, I think we get a lot of spoken word which are quite liberal and very forthcoming in the way that they talk about it through their poetry. But there was also a guy that he was in his 50s actually, and he emailed me after the show and said it was so great to see the energy of the youth talking about politics in such a creative manner, that even though he was conservative, he really respected what we were doing and the platform that we were giving for something as, I guess, as conflicting as politics.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Politics was just an example of, I don't want to draw it into a big political debate. Yeah,
doesn't it?
Yeah. Well, don't mention that, and don't mention religion. Jeez, Liam, come on.
Oh no, I never do. Not worth it.
Yeah. But I think that's like a really nice place, to wrap up the conversation. It's just amazing to hear about, all the amazing sort of insights and community that Long Story Short is building. I just want to say thanks for chatting with me today. I've had a great time. And I always like to wrap up by asking guests, what is on the horizon? So what's coming next for Long Story Short? What events are in the calendar? Where can we come to see you next? And again, if people are looking to get involved, maybe speak, how can they do that?
Sure. So we are the first Thursday of every month. Our next event is in collaboration with Manchester Literature Festival. The storyteller slots have already been taken, but tickets are now on sale, and it's on Saturday, the 2nd of April. It's a brilliant collaboration for youth writers, for the audience of 16 to 25, but anyone can come. But it's really about showcasing literature for everybody and making it accessible in all forms and all manners, all creative manners. So that's our next event. And then in June, we're running a Long Story Short first birthday party with a special event to celebrate our first year doing events across the city. That will be on the 10th of June at Grub near Victoria at the brilliant Chapeltown Picture House. So if they wish to get involved, please contact me on Instagram or send me an email at longstoryshortmanchester@gmail.com. But it's been an absolute pleasure, Liam. Thank you so much. It's great to be a friend of all my friends, Manchester. Thanks for giving us a platform. It's been a real pleasure. Thank you.
Anytime at all. For anyone listening, ticket links we'll put in the show notes, along with the books you mentioned and the YouTube channel, and also emails and Instagram handles and stuff. So we'll pop all of them in there. So you should be able to find all contact information there. And I'd like to say thank you to you, Simone, for coming on the show. It's been real fun. And thanks everyone for listening. Please don't forget to like and subscribe. So until next time, I'll see you again. And thank you again, Simone. Bye-bye.